Hi everyone, I'm Shaylin here with Reedsy, and today we're going to be taking a look at the romantic subplot. So this is the start of a new series that we have decided to call Trope Detective, where we take a look at different tropes. I don't know if you technically want to refer to as a romantic subplot as a trope, but it is a very common element in fiction, and so I kind of wanted to just take a look at it. I did a bit of a survey of books I've read, books on Goodreads, tried to draw some conclusions about this trope, and specifically why it's so common. Because here's the thing, romantic subplots are very, very common in fiction. They're almost a given in a lot of genres, if not most genres, but are they necessary, and is there a reason that this trope is so common, and is it usually helping the story? Because this is kind of just a discussion. I thought I would begin this with a bit of a personal story. I remember being 13, and when I was 13, I was writing my first novel, and I was also doing NaNoWriMo. My book did not have a romantic subplot in it, and I didn't want it to have one. At the time, I was reading primarily YA, like most 13-year-olds, and almost every single book that I encountered had a romantic subplot in it. I remember going onto the NaNoWriMo forum and asking, does my book need a romance? And I probably even said, I was like, I'm 13 and every book seems to have one. I was probably really like awkward about it, you know? Because, you know, this was a genuine concern that I had for my manuscript. I couldn't think of even a handful of books that I'd read recently that didn't have a romance in them, and so it just seemed like there was this pressure and that this was something that readers would be requiring and expecting of my book. So of course I went on to NaNoWriMo, I asked my question, and a few people responded and they were like, no you don't, it's okay, do what is best for your book, as I think would normally be the answer you would expect to get, but this was still a genuine worry that I had at the time. Now the answer that I got is, I think, the best answer to the question, and it's the answer you would expect to get. So then we have to ask, do most books need a romantic subplot? Because almost every book seems to have one. Now, this was a question that I had at 13, and I got my answer to it from some fellow writers, but that didn't really remove the pressure, you know? It removed the pressure for this one book. But as I continued on writing my second book and my third book, still around the age of 14, 15, I still felt like my books were missing something because they didn't have a romantic subplot in them. And I was writing YA books because YA is what I was reading, and I was 14 years old. The category all around me just seemed different from what I was writing just because it was lacking this one element. One book that I wrote was kind of a very standard, you know, 2011 YA dystopian novel. Really the only thing that wasn't standard about it was that there was no romance in it. And it didn't make sense for there to be one, and it also didn't need one, but it is still something that I continued to worry about. It was actually one of my biggest anxieties about my book because I felt an external pressure regarding my book, and eventually I got over this completely and I kind of, you know, outgrew this feeling of pressure. I don't think it's because the actual landscape of books that I was reading changed. I think it's more because eventually I got to the age where I was able to actually really accept what the people on the NaNoWriMo forum had first told me, which was just do what's best for your book. And as a young writer, it was actually pretty hard for me to really settle with that and get all the books that I was reading out of my head. But I understand why it's a worry that my young self had, because if you do a survey of most, you know, popular books and movies, there's going to be a romantic subplot in the majority of them. Of course it depends on the genres that you're looking at, but most genres seem to have a majority of books that have some kind of romance in them. And the funny thing is that readers seem very aware that this is an element that's not always necessary, because it seems quite common that we see readers commenting on the fact that the romance was just kind of wedged in without adding anything to the story. Unfortunately, it's hard to get exact figures on the topic. Believe me, I tried. Maybe I'll save this topic for my master's thesis. And you know, even if I did a survey of just the books on my shelf, it wouldn't really be accurate because it would just be skewed to the genre that I read based on kind of just looking at Goodreads and books that are popular in most genres. It kind of seems to be broken down like this. So in YA, which is where this phenomenon I think really takes root, where you see the majority of books that have a romantic subplot. Even saying 90% of YA books have a romantic subplot might even be kind of a conservative estimate. There are odd exceptions, of course, but they seem to be the exception. I did find a article with a list of, I think it was 100 YA books that don't have any romance in them. So if you are interested, if you are a YA reader but you are tired of so much romance, I will leave that in the description. We get into adult genre fiction, and I broke up adult into genre fiction and literary fiction because I think it's pretty different here in terms of the statistics. So it seems that in adult genre fiction, romantic subplots are fairly common, but it does depend on the genre. It seems like the romantic subplot in, say, genre like fantasy or sci-fi isn't as common as in YA, but is still fairly common to the point of being the majority of the books. And I think this probably boils down to the fact that there's more of an expectation that YA readers are teenagers and the only thing teenagers want to read about is romance. That seems to be kind of an expectation. In adult genre fiction, less common, but still the majority. Still fairly oversaturated. Maybe less important in terms of the marketing. I would say that in YA, even a book that isn't centered on a romance is probably going to be marketed where the romance is fairly important. It's going to take up a large part of that blurb. You know, you could be reading a fantasy book with battles, but it seems like the romance, the description of the love interest and how the characters meet and kind of just like hinting at their relationship takes up quite a lot of space of that blurb. That's one difference that I noticed, was that in adult genre fiction, it was less obvious from the blurb, it was less really sold in the blurb, whereas in YA, it was kind of the main selling point of the book, it seemed like. And then in adult literary fiction, I think it's pretty different, where the happiness of the character is not as much of a concern. Usually there's not. That kind of standard romance subplot I find doesn't really exist as much in literary fiction, just because that seems to be more of a genre occurrence, and I think is part of an idea of what we expect from genre fiction, but it's not something that we expect from literary fiction, so you don't find it as much there. When you do find romance in literary fiction, it's usually not kind of the traditional romantic subplot. It doesn't usually progress in that way. It's not hard to conclude that romantic subplots are everywhere. Part of the question is, why are they everywhere? And there are a few reasons that I've concluded why I think they're so common. They're there because it's what we think people want to read. Because certain books set trends, and when books set trends, they also set expectations. When a book sells really well, as Twilight did, we don't only say, well, this is the trend now, we're gonna have a lot of vampire romances. We can also, as writers, as the publishing industry, draw the conclusion there are elements of this book that people want more of because they ate this up. There is just a general expectation that the majority of readers are looking for romance in every book that they read. What kind of plot reason is that there, you know? Because a lot of the time we talk about isn't necessary, but what do these romantic subplots usually do for the plot? And there are a few things that I've noticed. The first one is fairly obvious, but they provide something to invest in. People get very invested in romantic relationships, and they tend to get more invested in fictional romantic relationships than other kind of relationships. Kind of seems to often be a way to provide kind of an avenue for your readers to invest in the characters and invest in the characters' future. If you can get the readers to care about this relationship, and it seems that a romance is a pretty good way to get people to invest in not one but two characters, you're then really getting them quite invested in the characters' future and the characters' lives and the characters' well-being. Number two is simply for relationship development, because relationship development is key in pretty much all books. Almost every story that you encounter is going to have some kind of key relationship development. It's not always a romance, it could be a friendship, it could be a mentor-mentee relationship, it could be a family relationship, but romance seems to be, in most cases, the most obvious avenue to go in terms of providing some kind of relationship development for the reader to invest in, because it is pretty hard to write a book without some kind of key relationship to establish. Number three is because it makes the character grow and make choices. And more than that, it makes them make difficult choices, and I think this is one of the most important ones. I think that the romantic subplot is often used as a way to, well, make the character grow, because now you have a relationship, and the reason that we usually have relationship development, no matter what kind of relationship it is because this relationship development forces both characters, but namely, we're focusing on the protagonist, to grow through this relationship. And we want our characters to change, and we need to give them an avenue to change. So this is often a way to do it. But it also puts the character in a position where they have to make hard choices. And the character making hard choices is where we see their growth. It's where their characterization is revealed, and it's also where the stakes feel really high. Love is a very high stake, and I think that really is one of the biggest reasons why we often see the romantic subplot, is because it provides huge stakes. There aren't many bigger stakes than the character's life and love. Those are both very huge stakes. I think oftentimes the romantic subplot is used as a way to put the character in a place where they have to make very hard choices. They have to choose between their goal, something else that they want, and between this relationship. And that can be really heartbreaking. That can be really powerful. That can really reveal character. It is a really good tool. So those are a few reasons why we have romantic subplot. But what are some reasons why maybe we don't always need them? Because here's the thing. When I googled the phrase, do books need romance? I came across a lot of forums, Quora articles, and subreddits where readers basically just talked about the fact that they were pretty tired of there being romance in every single book. And it seems to be a fairly common grievance that a lot of readers have, and it seems that most readers aren't saying, I don't like it when books have romance. They're saying, I feel like every book has a romance just because. And a lot of the time it feels unnecessary, and a lot of the time it feels like it's just kind of wedged in there because it's expected. A lot of the discussion that I came across seemed to focus on readers saying that when they actually found a book that didn't have romance, and a lot of this seemed quite focused on the YA community, they said that they found that really refreshing, or they talked about books that they otherwise would have liked but they thought it was harmed because there was just an unnecessary romance thrown in. A lot of readers I saw expressed a desire to have more friendships as the central relationship that's developed through a book. And I really agree with that. I think especially in young adults, friendship is so important as a teen, and I wanted to see that reflected because that was something that I could relate to more than a romantic relationship. So in the end, it seems that readers are on board for books trending towards less romance. Basically towards there only being romance when it's actually adding something. But it seems like maybe publishing trends haven't quite caught up to that idea, at least not in YA yet. I'm really curious to hear what your thoughts are on this. Are you pro romantic subplot? Are you anti romantic subplot? Are you in the just when it's necessary, please? No more of these unnecessary plot lines, just there because we think they should be there. I'd love to hear your opinions. What are books that you think did the romantic subplot well? What are books where you thought it was pretty unnecessary? So thank you so much for watching. Remember to subscribe for new writing, editing, and publishing videos every Tuesday and Friday, and I'll see you next time. Bye.